Partner owns it. Brought to you by Partner with DNS, Platinum Partner Facebook, Knowledge Partner Global DCA, and Insight Partner Dialogue. We are now moving on to our next session on India's place in the crypto ecosystem analysis. I would like to introduce you to the moderator of this session, Vivan, Sharan, partner, Koan Advisory Group. Next, I want to introduce the panelists, Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and Dr. Amar Patnaik, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha.
Thank you, Shivani. It's a real honor, pleasure, delight to be with parliamentarians who follow technology issues so closely. Through the course of this conference, it's fairly clear that while none of us can truthfully claim to know what the future holds for virtual currencies, it certainly is the case that it's not here to be a passing fad. That's why we're having this serious conversation today. There are estimated about 15 million Indians who are invested into this market. And crypto adoption over the last year during COVID has also expanded manifold by about 800% since the same time last year. And Bitcoin and Ethereum between themselves are now over $1 trillion in market. So let me start and then request the colleagues on the panel to mute their mics so we don't have echo. Thank you. Mark Carney of the Bank of England stated about cryptocurrencies a couple of years in a famous white paper that he's authored, that authorities need to decide whether to isolate, regulate, or integrate crypto assets and their associated activities. This sounds very much like the mainstreaming of the internet itself, and in many ways, virtual currencies are also like the internet, because cryptocurrency, disaggregated and decentralized finance reduce the need for intermediaries much as the internet does. And of course, the old saying that technology always outpaces regulation seems to be the case globally. There are many ways in which policymakers can address this conundrum through a spectrum of actions, ranging from prohibition to regulation to promotion. So can we draw on your experiences in Parliament? And if we can start with you, Priyanka ji, first. In Parliament and policy, you must have various instances and anecdotes on what types of regulatory interventions tend to work for complex, fast-moving areas such as this. And what doesn't work is perhaps as important as what works. So any anecdotes on this would be useful to kick off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivan, and good afternoon to Dr. Patnaik. We've been having this discussion off camera many times on cryptocurrency, because it's one of these new age techs that we're talking about, new age currency we're talking about, virtual currency we're talking about, that not many seem to be aware of. Even it took me a lot of months to understand what are we even talking about. So when we're talking about, and instead of calling it cryptocurrency, I would prefer calling it crypto assets that we need to work upon. At this point in time, I have been speaking to lots of people who are in this space. Considering there is no policy mechanism in place, we had RBI ban crypto exchanges and cryptocurrency usage. There is a lot of gray area that persists, and that is something which even those who are in this space are worried about. I have been speaking to a lot of people who are in this business, the top three amongst them being Persistence that I have spoken to. I have spoken to CoinDCX. And what I would, from my personal point of view, I do not have an anecdote to share, because it ranges in the Parliament. It ranges from cryptocurrency being the root cause of all evil right now, which leads to kidnapping, extortion, murders, etc., is all happening through that, and the need for banning it. And there is an other thought process which says that we need to have a better regulatory framework. Which will perhaps be fluid in nature, because we at this point in time do not know in just how much more it is going to be widening into and what the scope of it is. So more fluid structure, looking at other countries, how they are looking at it and how they are incorporating it in terms of making it possible for a area to thrive, for a new model to thrive. And I think it is extremely important that India engages in this discussion while looking at the risk factors, not ignoring that part. Just selling the good part of it does not make sense because of the volatility involved. In fact, I was reading US has come out with a new notification warning investors that there's a huge amount of variation volatility, so they should be careful before investing. So there has to be, I would personally want that there is discussion on it, there is knowledge about it, and policy framework can only come in place when all stakeholders are heard and their ideas are incorporated, and it has to be fluid in nature, understanding the medium and how to create an ecosystem that will take India into new age world. And we are all coming from India. If you look at the context, we are good with tech. It is something that works to our advantage, and instead of losing that particular window period that we have, I think we need to work around that.
Amar ji, do you agree? And Priyanka ji mentioned the US framework, which is fast evolving. In fact, the US SEC boss is now someone who's talked extensively about cryptocurrency, lectured about it, and so on. And it seems like there is an inexorable movement towards regulation. As an analogy he often gives, this is Barry Gensler. He says that the automobile industry didn't fully take off until governments laid out driving rules. He said speed limits and traffic lights provided public safety, but also helped cars become mainstream. So, drawing from this analogy, he says it's only with bringing things inside and sort of clearly within our public policy goals that a technology has a chance of broader adoption. So, do you agree with this contention, sir? I think Mr. Patnaik is having a bit of trouble joining Priyanka ji, so it seems more like a bilateral fireside chat for now. But just
I don't mind that either.
Picking up from what you said about the US, in many ways, it's a sort of a north star for the direction in which things are heading. Do you think we can really afford to be outside of these developments at this stage? And to what extent can we collaborate as well with governments around the world? There are discussions around tax, around financial flows, and money laundering that is international in nature. So, what level of participation can India hope to provide through its parliamentarians and regulators?
What I would personally say is that India needs to also take the lead on this particular matter. Also, taking best practices in the world, like you said, that it's a process in motion right now. Nobody knows when it reaches conclusion and what more can we bring to. I think Amar has joined, so in case you'd want him to.
Amarji, we were just saying, I hope you can hear us.
Someone can't hear Vivan actually. I can't hear him actually.
You can't hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Please go
So
ahead.
I try to be louder. Do you think that it's only with bringing things inside the public policy fold that we can give technology a broader chance at adoption, and also, of course, try to further the goals of investor protection and consumer protection? Do you think that bringing it inside the regulatory fold is therefore an optimal option right now for India to exercise in whatever limited or expansive way the regulators deem fit?
Yeah, actually, Vivan, this is very crucial because you see, the entire crypto space survives on trust, and this trust can come in only when there is a set of standards and procedures. I don't say it has to be necessarily government regulation. It could be a G20 regulation. It could be all countries sit down and decide that the trust in the system should be maintained. Now, why this trust is required? Because these investors, they are not necessarily the same kind of thing that we face in our stock markets. Why did we have this SEBI? We had SEBI because the small investors interest had to be protected, and in the crypto, since it's an open space, you would have small investors. You have to ensure that there are no defaults, there are no volatility doesn't reach a level in which the small investor really loses, and then comes back to people like Priyanka and I asking what happened to our savings and what happened to our retirement benefit, just as they do now. And the same thing happened with the Ponzi scheme. What was there in Ponzi schemes? There was no way the government was involved. Somebody came in and said, "I'll give you to 200% in 5 days," and the fellow fell into it and lost his money. Government didn't really have anything to do there. But then this is what public policy is: a welfare state, that the government has to come in. There has to be a regulation put in place, systems to be put in place, that their interests are protected, while at the same time not jeopardizing innovation, not jeopardizing growth, not jeopardizing some amount of speculation. If there is no speculation, there will be no stock market. So I think you are right that we need to have this for this sector to grow, even under the asset classification only. If we leave aside the currency classification and only treat cryptos as asset class, even then a regulation, a strong regulatory framework would ensure that people come in and are safe. They have a trust in the system that they are getting into.
Thank you, sir. Just picking up from where you left off on a strong regulatory framework, Priyanka ji, do you think, like the US has done in several other countries, regulating crypto exchanges is perhaps the easiest way for the government to get a quick handle on trading of these digital assets? Because there are already about 15 million or so Indian investors in this space. And let's remember for a minute that our stock market in aggregate does not have more than 20 to 30 million participants on any given day, on any given year. So we're fairly close to reaching the volumes of participation and soon enough, perhaps even value to regulated stock markets, which of course exchanges play a prominent role in.
And I think that becomes all the more important to be able to regulate a space which is working in the gray zone right now. Even these crypto exchanges that are in place, they do not know what their future looks like. Many of them have gone and registered themselves overseas. Can India afford to just lie low and continue to have a wait and watch policy at a point in time when there are millions of youngsters who are looking at this platform, understanding this platform better, crypto assets better, wanting to come in as investors? And that is where the volatility issue comes up. So here everybody is going star-eyed thinking that, I put in X amount of money and it will double, triple, and it will, quadruple, and we will come back with that money. So that if you do not regulate these exchanges, if you push them to get out of this country and continue to, you may ban this, but what you do is you push them again. I would say in areas where you have absolutely no control. So the minute you regulate, you are giving some kind of legitimacy to this. You're safeguarding the interests of the investors. And if there is such a large volume of investors already, then I think the alarm bell should be ringing in terms of policy making space with the government, etc., to push for a bill which is all encompassing, which also takes in mind investor, like he was saying, safeguarding our investors, as well as ensuring that we are not in any way denying a space for building an ecosystem that I think India is strong in, and Indian people have strongly been working in. Fintech is a space which cannot be ignored, can create job employment, can create wealth, and can be the next big thing. So it is something that we really need to fast forward.
On this note, Amarji, if I could request you to come in with what you think are some of the top priorities vis-a-vis regulation. We've talked about investor protection and consumer protection, and of course, we are a developing country. We can't blindly follow in the path of advanced nations. So what, according to you, would you like responses from the crypto community and other regulators who are monitoring this community? What are some of the most important areas from an Indian perspective?
Right. I think the first thing to me is to define what is cryptocurrency. What is private cryptocurrency or private virtual currency, and is there anything private? So I think first you have to be clear on the definition. Then second, whether you want to be graded in your approach, in the sense you will use it as a token currency, so get RBI to also come in, or treat it only as an asset class, so only SEBI has some role to play, or have both, in which case we need hybrid kind of a regulator. So you need to have a new regulator, or because there will be otherwise, turf wars, and there could be a mix of transactions. So the what kind of regulator we want would be very important. And the third thing, and the most important thing in the entire crypto space, is this, which the Supreme Court also said in the that judgment of the Internet Cable Mobile Association of India versus RBI. The discharge, in the case of a discharge, because it's a debt, so a discharge of the debt, that characteristic is not currently there. And if it has to be done, who is responsible? If it is not done, who is responsible? That is not known. Since you have to, if you have to treat this as something very secure, something trustworthy, something people could jump into, then you need to define this. So the settlement system has to be put in place. And for all this, I think the first thing, that instead of denying that, as if that space doesn't exist, as if this market doesn't exist, when it is reaching the level, as we were in the RBI the other day, it is reaching currently the crypto space is almost same as the gold space, the transaction. So we have to first, I think, put a regulatory and innovation sandbox, both in SEBI as well as in RBI, and see prototype wise how it can marry with the Indian system, because Indians' appetite for risk is much less compared to many in the West. The appetite is different in different categories of population. So if you have a regulatory sandbox, then you'll slowly, gradually have the regulation in place. So government, I think, now has to take control. This is what I've been telling also in the finance committee to the finance secretary as well as to Niti Aayog, that different classes, if you treat crypto as different classes, then different regulators kick in. And the asset class SEBI, for example, would say that no, there is the BUDS Act over there, no, the unregulated deposits, so why should I do it? So government now has to take a call, and I think this is the most important time. I must tell you that there is a paper from 2019, I think, Niti Aayog report, which says that we should encourage this and that, and at the same time now you're saying that you are going to ban it. So it can't happen. Government has to be very clear that we need to regulate. Of course, we have to decide what is a cryptocurrency. Where are you going to follow a graded approach? If it is a graded approach, then should we put some companies in the regulatory sandbox and see how some of these, crypto exchanges or crypto operators? And then also in the exchange, we have to decide what will be the settlement, how will be settlement. Suppose there is a fault, whether it will act also as a clearinghouse. Many of these issues, but we can't just wish it away. The current thinking, as it appears, even during the interactions with the RBI and the SEBI, is to not recognize nobody who is the issuer, who has issued it. You can have debate on all those issues, but people have already issued it and it is operating in the private space. So we better, as Priyanka ji said, we need to get into regulate. And if we do not have the knowledge, because it's very difficult, because cross-border things, you do not know how to do it, get into a regulatory sandbox, try to develop a hybrid regulation, and at the same time get into a regulation which is initially soft touch regulation, and then depending on the risks that you think of, you bring in hard regulations. I think that would be my approach.
Thank you, sir. That's a very clear path that you have thought of, and I can just ask Priyanka ji to build on that, because sir, you mentioned Niti Aayog, and Niti Aayog, in fact, recently has brought out a paper on artificial intelligence. It's been doing a lot of work in that space, and they talk about risk-based regulation in that paper for artificial intelligence, which is equally unknown as virtual currencies at the very least. So Priyanka ji, in India, the regulators always, it's very much like sort of, as Amar ji mentioned, we are a social welfare economy. We can't shy away from that. We are a low income economy, etc.
Low risk appetite.
Low risk appetite as well. So is there a way you think that in a sandboxed environment or otherwise, there could be a graded approach followed for different classes of categories of investors in this market? And also linked to that is this whole notion of know your customer. I mean, we have this KYC in all financial markets. It's important to know who's investing. And in fintech, there is a close association now in some of the leading markets, such as European Union markets. There's a close association between strong KYC norms and the risk appetite or ability for somebody to take a risk in a particular market. So because exchanges, for instance, would know who it is who is participating in this market, they are perhaps better suited to actually understand this risk matrix than a regulator. No, otherwise, we are sitting in our offices now, nobody even moves out, and you are thinking about the risk appetite of very heterogeneous set of investors in the country. So, just your thoughts on this entire approach.
Firstly, I totally concur with what Dr. Patnaik was saying. Having a hybrid model where you have some say of the RBI, some regulatory mechanism like the SEBI, which keeps the investors in mind, and also the graded approach to investment. I think KYC is a must. I have been, like I said initially, I have spoken to Persistent, Coin DCX. All of them are open to the idea of having some kind of a regulatory mechanism. But I also think that it has to be more dynamic in nature. You cannot just create a regulatory framework and not be able to change as per the innovations that kick in. There are various formats that crypto space is moving towards. So when I say creating an environment, an enabling environment, you also, while keeping the investors' interest in mind, you're also keeping in mind that for India to look at the next wave of reaching its $5 trillion economy, a $10 trillion economy, it is its mind that you have to use. It's the tech space that you will have to use. It's a human capital that you have been talking about in terms of demographic dividend that you all will have to enable, empower, and create an ecosystem for. So I think by creating these exchanges and then they're going registering abroad, India is doing nothing, getting nothing out of it. So India would also need to create, besides creating a policy framework, it will have to create an enabling network for people, for young innovators to get into this space and to continue to innovate and come up with more unicorns for India to build upon. Unfortunately, a lot of our unicorns are moving abroad. That's another issue which I think the government really needs to seriously look into. So an enabling regulatory framework, safeguarding our customers, safeguarding those investors, grading them on the basis of their ability to mitigate risk, as well as ensuring, like he said, settlements. How do these settlements take place? Who is responsible for it? The government cannot wash its hands off saying that, since we've not identified the workspace and we haven't identified, these guys have been working on their own and it's a space that they don't take responsibility for. You can't do away with that. We continue to have these coin exchanges working, like Coin DCX and various exchanges working, with they themselves not knowing where their future is headed, while they have lots of investors investing through them. So that is something which I think the government would really need to look into, and that can only come about if you have stakeholders coming on board.
Amarji?
Yeah, Vine, actually, very, very, very important point. Being a student of public policy and having practiced public policy for long in my career, I have seen the first approach to something that you don't understand is to ban it. It is very easy to supply public policy of prohibition, banning, because you do not know it. You are not even wanting to know, but you want to prohibit it. And as always, when it was prohibition relating to liquor, what has happened? You shouldn't supply public policy which you can't implement. Policy cycle includes implementation. And this is what would be happen here if you supply a public policy of prohibition, completely banning, and then you can't implement it. Number one. Number two, as Priyanka ji was saying very correctly, that the government always it so happens that regulations lag technology. Technology moves very fast. Now I don't like when I am saying this, that India as it is, even though it is a leader in technology, but while making policy, we even lack that particular technology. We lack the regulation which is there in other parts of the world. So we are having two lags. Now that shouldn't happen. Now I'll pick out a particular case. Let us say many companies are now investing in and they're showing it in the balance sheet. Now if they want to do it in India, the Chartered Accountants Association of India should have come out with a guideline by now, or it will have to do it eventually. So it is not just the regulators of who are doing the transactions, SEBI and RBI, even how it will appear in the accounts, how it will appear in other statements, financial reporting formats. That also has to be worked out. I don't know whether anybody is working on it at all. And that's also a huge amount of space where people can get jobs, new areas, new avenues. So I think, we told this to Niti Aayog. I have myself told this to Niti Aayog in the Finance Committee that please get going on it very quickly and set up a committee to quickly suggest something to the government. And I've told this to the government as well. We have done it as a Finance Committee itself, that we don't have much time. It has already reached a level which is very high, and transactions or investors should not be wounded. And even if it is treated as an asset class, companies should not be wounded. In fact, companies should be. Let me give you another example. When there is this cyclone that happened, Yash and other things, the natural disasters, I remember that Australian cricketer who donated in bitcoins. So what do? You say, no, I'll not take it. So the situation is that let us recognize the reality, get our acts together very fast. We are very slow in doing it. And I think, the people who are in the space, please get them into the fold so that, a suggestion can come and then you modify on it. Because if you leave it to the bureaucracy is as usual status quo. It will take time. And then, as I said, India will be facing 2 lags. As it is, regulations face 1 lag behind technology.
Absolutely. So, Priyanka ji, just building on that, there's in India there are unique national security concerns. We live in a subcontinent which is rife with terrorism, which is perhaps likely to increase with the adverse events we've seen in the region in Afghanistan. And there are very serious, hard concerns, security concerns linked to money laundering. And one of the counter arguments, of course, is that these concerns exist for cash as well. It's not like we've done away with Hawala and so on and so forth. So do you think that, keeping those concerns in mind, there is a way in which we can still find a path for this new technology? And the second part of this question, if you'll allow me, is also that, we've also seen the development of central bank digital currencies. China is taking a very active role now, and that also has national security implications of its own. And perhaps the way to address this is actually to embrace this technology, to make sure that in 5 years we don't suddenly wake up to a world where the equivalent of dollarization has happened through a Chinese central bank digital currency. So your thoughts on all of these things?
No, I always believe every new area, new space brings with it its own challenges. It also has its inherent risks, its inherent issues. Inherent adoption of those spaces is something which every country should be able to gauge, should be able to understand, grasp, and create mechanisms. Of course, Bitcoin comes, no, forget Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies come with their own challenges and the transparency issues that I spoke about, that some members of parliament, there are extreme thoughts on this particular issue. So you will need to find a middle path. If I remember when Infosys, which is now being much maligned, but Infosys, when India was not even having a tech policy in place, Infosys was sending lakhs and lakhs of Indians abroad to the US, taking advantage of that particular space that was created by the US. If India was to move faster, I would say governments as well as policymakers as well as bureaucracy have a lowest risk appetite, especially in the country right now, which not just right now, it has been inherent issue with India in terms of adopting some new spaces, new sunrise places, which we can look at making good in terms of economy. But we would need to find a place. We would need to be able to ensure, I believe UK is not being very creative. They are coming up with their own Bitcoin as a central currency for crypto. So those are things which I think India can definitely engage in. But for me, my perspective would be a framework which safeguards as well as enables an environment that will take us into the next era of digital as well as tech space and financial technology, finance.
Amarji.
Yeah. So there are 2 questions that you asked. One is relating to the weaknesses or the way the system could be misused or abused, for the purpose of terrorism, financing terrorism, money laundering, and frauds. Now, let me bring in here that if we are not regulating, we are no one by any stretch of imagination can suggest that it is going to stop terrorism financing or fraud or money laundering. It would still continue. So, in the process of money laundering or terrorist financing, uh, the best way to attack these kind of things is when it gets generated initially, and then to track and detect, and then whatever take reforms required to stop this. If you have a regulation in place, then you can actually stop these kind of activities. Now, you might say that how do you track it when it is very difficult to know how it passes? And that's where I think you can get in the entire Money Laundering Act in it. In the US, it is treated as a security, and all the controls that are required in the transaction in securities applies to the cryptocurrencies. So you can do the same thing out here. So there are ways, but if you do not regulate, it doesn't by any stretch of imagination mean that you're going to wish away that kind of a financing. Then number two, the central bank digital currency is being thought about as a replacement, or not as a replacement, as a kind of replacement to the cash in the existing money supply mechanism. It's a part of the existing money supply mechanism. Every central bank is now thinking about it, and by this method, people who are actually initially having problems, or have problems dealing with cash, it will reduce some cash circulation. It will go into digital coins. But why it would succeed is because of the quality of regulation and governance. And then it is only then the foreign investors will invest in the CBDC. And the same thing applies to the private crypto space. You bring into this, and then why don't the central banks, if it is a currency or if it is only asset plus the SEBI, think about having a competitor? Let there be competition. So CBDCs as a fiat currency, I think, is a good idea. Very well, the cryptocurrency space, private cryptocurrency space, can coexist with regulation, and it may be a different regulator. And I think then it will thrive. It will lead to many kinds of innovations across the board in different sectors. It is smart contract. It could be in agri-tech. It could be even in the transport sector, in logistics. So let's actually not shut down the box of innovation that Indians are capable of producing by using these technologies like blockchain, AI, or IoT, and other things. But as I am saying, and Priyanka ji said very well, that we have to move very fast. The point is that we can't be lagging behind even the international regulation. In fact, India should be leading because of the startups, because of strength in technology, because of our understanding of technology, because of our people being involved in many of the places. These are our people may have been the one who have been generating or mining these cryptocurrencies. And thirdly, many of our people who are in Europe, who are in US, they are at the pole position in managing and regulating these cryptocurrencies. Their knowledge is already available. We could lead in the G7 or G20 saying that these are the concerns relating to terrorism, money laundering, and all. This is how it can be controlled, and this is the regulation or hybrid regulator that we can think of. I think the time has come for us to take that lead position.
Excellent.
Brilliant, sir. Thank you for that exposition. I think we've so many comments really commending both of you for the progressive stance you've taken as parliamentarians. It's a rare commodity in some ways.
That's not kind. That's not kind. I think most parliamentarians are progressive.
I think we're being realist here.
They're weighed down by the duality between Bharat and India, which I think all of us grapple with. Shivani, do you want us to close this conversation, or do we have space for one more question?
We can take one more question.
So this is to both of you, Priyanka ji and Amar ji. The industry, we interact with them. They're very keen to really, as you said, remain in India, grow this proposition in India, make in India for the world. not have a sort of a brain drain in this frontier technology, which both of you have acknowledged. So can you leave us with a few recommendations for industry on how to really advocate their interests, especially to parliamentarians who need to be educated as much as the consumers, as we agree in this session? Priyanka ji, any tips for industry on how to proceed, and followed by Amar ji?
Actually, I'm no one to give advice to them on this particular space. I'm sure they'll figure the mechanism out. But I think communication with masses is extremely important, and also inherent risks that are involved. Also, this understanding that right now we do not have a policy mechanism in place. So even though they do not want to work out of India, whatever work is happening in India is also in the gray zone, is also something that we are acutely aware of. So I think conversations need to be created, conversations which are very basic in nature, which I would say a school-going child should be able to understand. So those are conversations which I'm sure they would be engaging in, and engaging not just with the people of the country, not just with the investors, but even those who are in the policy space, in the bureaucracy space. They need to, I think most of us need to shed that inhibition to be able to understand something new, understand something which we may not have enough knowledge about, but to be able to grasp what we are missing out on if we slow down this entire process.
Thank you, Amarji. Understand, embrace, promote. How
Yeah,
far can you go?
I would say, policy advocacy, building investor confidence, investor awareness, and most important, this is important, use cases. Please propagate or disseminate the use cases that can come out of using this technology. So many of our startups are using this technology or using this space, doing innovations. Please disseminate that particular thing for people to realize that so much good is also there in it, despite the bad things that government is saying, which is true. I'm not saying it's no. So the responsibility on the industry is as much as the government, in terms of educating the normal investor, the small retail investor who could be interested in the Bitcoin. It has the responsibility of educating the, as Priyanka ji said, the bureaucrats, the politicians, or the policymakers as to how to move forward, and most importantly, to open the box of innovation, the use cases, how it can help the society, how it can help India to grow whatever beyond the $5 trillion economy in future, how it creates jobs, which are the areas it creates jobs, which are the new disciplines that people might be interested in taking in, a refresher course or a new course in, or what are the avenues possible. No, they have to spread out. Governments can't do that. I think that's what my message to the industry would be.
Thank you so much, both of you. It's really been heartening to hear these views from you, and I think everyone agrees in the audience. And I think the common underlying fact here is that let India be among those handful of countries that really take pole position, leadership position in both setting the agenda, and spreading the benefits really to all sections of society. Thank you for joining us today. Shivani, over to you.
Thank you so much for such an engaging discussion. Thank you to all our attendees as well who are here with us today. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be back shortly with the next session. Stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And sorry for actually missing out the initial portion because of these internet issues, but it was engaging in discussion as always with Priyanka.